Greetings all, welcome to the 10th Annual Bhaktivedanta Swami Lecture, held in honor of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. A very warm welcome to you, our dear audience, our esteemed guests, Keshava Swami, who's a spiritual author, community mentor, dynamic teacher, and worldwide traveler. He's joined by Utumileng Munale. She was recognized as a IBM Global Woman in AI honoree in 2020, and in the same year was named as one of the top 100 global data visionaries. Both accomplished leaders will engage with us on the topic of AI, humanity, and God. This is a particularly relevant topic given the rapid advances in the field, and we're very eager to bring a spiritual perspective to this conversation. My name is Nanda Padiachi. I'm an Associate Director at the Boston Consulting Group. The Bhaktivedanta Book Trust was established in 1972 by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The BBT is the world's largest publisher of ancient texts, epics, and contemporary works on Vedic spirituality and philosophy. The BBT has published and translated Srila Prabhupada's books in more than 90 languages, which include titles in Swahili, isiZulu, Amharic, Creole, Xhosa, and Setswana, and has translations in production in various other African languages. It honors his important literary and social contribution. He has authored and translated more than 70 volumes of books based on timeless Vedic wisdom that were previously locked in the Sanskrit language. Today, his books are the preferred authoritative academic texts in Indology studies by universities across the globe. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge our Emeritus Trustee, His Holiness Jayadvaita Swami, Dr. Mani Singh, the Global Trustee, and Mr. Niresh Gopichand, the BBT Africa CEO. The Bhaktivedanta Book Trust Africa Division has been hosting the Bhaktivedanta Swami Lecture series since 2013 at prestigious South African academic institutions and has become one of the hallmark events. BBT Africa has in the past collaborated with the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and the Thuli Madonsela Foundation Trust. The lecture has drawn the attention of a global audience, tackling issues in education, leadership, economics, and social transformation. Every day, we're bombarded with information about the rapid paces and advancement in artificial intelligence and various perspectives from utopian to dystopian views and perspectives from politicians, CEOs of the largest organizations in the world. Some have even remarked that artificial intelligence is the most important discovery since fire. What's important as this technology becomes more pervasive and takes on a more meaningful role in our lives is to address the fundamental questions of what does this mean in terms of identity, purpose, humanity, free will, and perhaps the greatest aspect from this conversation that has been missing is around the spiritual dimension. The unique perspective that we'd like to offer from the Bhaktivedanta Swami Lecture this year is in relation to the spiritual considerations that should be applied in the advancement and adoption of this technology. With that, I'd like to formally introduce our keynote speaker for today's discussion on our topic of AI, humanity, and God. Keshava Swami is a spiritual author, community mentor, dynamic teacher, and worldwide traveler. In 2002, after graduating from the University College of London with a BSc in Information Management, he adopted full-time monastic life to expand his knowledge, deepen his spirituality, and share these timeless principles with wider society. For over 20 years, Keshava Swami was a resident monk at ISKCON's United Kingdom's headquarters, Bhaktivedanta Manor. There, he pioneered the School of Bhakti, led the monastic training program, and drove forward national outreach projects. He has designed numerous courses on Vedic theology, lifestyle management, and spiritual development, and has also authored 10 books which bring the ancient wisdom into the modern context. Nowadays, he is a globetrotter, teaching in universities, corporate firms, government organizations, and spiritual communities, bringing wisdom to places which need it the most. He continues to diligently study the Sanskrit texts, considering how to proliferate spiritual wisdom in a world that is suffocating from materialism.
Thank you so much, Nanda, for your warm and kind introduction, and my deep gratitude to the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust for allowing us to be here today, organizing this wonderful lecture and having this forum to discuss a very, very important topic. And also my deep gratitude to Itu Meleng for being here with us so we can have a nice conversation and some exchange. Yes, artificial intelligence has become so much a part of our lives. Often knowingly and often unknowingly, we're interacting with this new technology, and it really is impacting our lives in different ways. So today we'll be looking at that. And I thought it quite interesting that when I was preparing for what to share with all of you today, I thought, let me go into an AI meme generator and ask them the question, how should I explain AI? So that was my that was my question to the meme generator, the artificial meme generator. And this was the answer that came up. Artificial intelligence or AI actually incomprehensible. Yes, so perhaps this is AI. It's so complex, it's so multifaceted, so multi-layered that to encapsulate it and to explain it in the course of this discussion would practically be impossible. But clearly a very, very intricate technology that's changing human behavior, changing society, relationships, and changing our experience of life. If we look a little bit deeper at what AI actually is, it's basically a compound of different features that creates a more and more complex way to mine information and use it to manipulate and achieve things in the world. Will there ever be a time when artificial intelligence will replace human beings? And will there ever be a time when artificial intelligence may even supersede human beings? We've seen it in sci-fi movies, everything from Star Trek to Star Wars. We've seen these kind of simulations of superhuman robots who are able to do very, very complex things. But scientists and spiritualists alike are quick to remind us that although artificial intelligence technologies are undoubtedly increasing and becoming more and more complex, they'll never really actually be able to replace conscious, sentient human beings. This is the very famous statement from John Searle, a professor emeritus at the Department of Philosophy in the University of California, Berkeley, who says, you can expand the power all you want, hooking up as many computers as you think you need, and they still won't be conscious because all they'll ever do is shuffle symbols. As artificial intelligence becomes more and more complex, we should just be careful and just be aware that that technology does not replace conscious, sentient human beings. Consciousness, as we know in the world of science, is somewhat of a mystery. They say there's the soft problem of consciousness, which is the area of science which is trying to understand how neural events and emotional experiences are connected, how neural processing within our consciousness takes place. And we can say this soft problem of consciousness, or the correlation between neural events and emotional experiences, that is an area in which science has significantly advanced. And therefore we're understanding more the workings of the mind, the workings of the consciousness, the workings of our psychology. But then scientists are facing the hard problem of consciousness, which is not so much about correlation between neural events and emotional experiences, but it's more to do with causation. Where does that emotional experience come from? Where does consciousness come from? Where does volition, sentience, where does the ability to have free will, where do ethics and morals and values and feelings, where do all of these things come from? Who is actually the one who is experiencing all these things? If AI is able to make a robot which can detonate explosives, where is the emotional experience? Does the robot feel any emotions? Joy, fear, apprehension? Not really. So where do those conscious emotional experiences come from? That is the hard problem of consciousness that science hasn't really been able to tackle. And therefore, we see that as artificial intelligence increases, we have to be very, very much aware that artificial intelligence can never replace human beings. The first and most fundamental reason is that there's a dependability. Artificial intelligence technologies, after all, are created by human beings. Artificial intelligence technologies often need to be fact-checked. Whatever they come out with needs to be fact-checked by human beings. Artificial intelligence is often as good as the prompting that's offered by humans in interaction with that artificial intelligence technology. And therefore, no matter how complex AI becomes, it cannot replace humans because ultimately it relies on humans to input data and to control that technology. Artificial AI technologies also have their limitations due to adaptability. Humans are able to adapt, to be flexible when uncertainty or when unique situations arise. Humans have the ability to navigate it through their conscious awareness. Whereas for AI technologies, if a certain data isn't included within the algorithm, when uncertain and unique situations arise, the AI technology becomes severely limited in its ability to respond. AI is also limited due to morality. Humans have the ability in any given situation not just to process information, but then to frame it within a moral structure so that they can decide in any given situation what principle should take precedence. AI is severely limited in its ability to do this. And ultimately, AI has no individuality. It has no free will. AI doesn't really have personality. These are the unique aspects that come from humans and empower and facilitate the variety and creativity and beauty that we see in life. And therefore, as a very foundation of our discussion today, I think it's just very important to kind of emphasize and highlight that point that while AI is definitely becoming more and more complex and advanced in its functioning, AI can never replace human consciousness. AI can never create consciousness. In fact, the mystery of consciousness is something that science is still very, very much grappling with. We see that AI is impacting all aspects of our life, from work to education to society, relationships, health. And if we look very, very practically at the world we're living in today, then we can see that there are very, very powerful benefits which are coming about from AI. In education, we're seeing that AI is allowing for a much more advanced system, allowing children to learn in a much more powerful way. Personalized study and technologies of AI allow children to see what their strengths, what their abilities, what their unique gifts are, and then create an educational plan which is personalized to them. instead of having a mechanized and standard approach of education for everyone, which is what modern education has been based on in the previous decades. AI in health is allowing for better diagnosis of diseases. AI also allows for creativity at work by eliminating the need for monotonous certain tasks to be done by humans. Is opening up the opportunity for humans to use their intelligence and their analytical capacities in much more creative ways. But along with all of these benefits, we see that AI is also creating problems in the world. It's creating a loss of jobs. AI is replacing the need for humans in many, many areas, and that doesn't just create an economic impact of de-skilling and unemployment, but it also creates an existential impact on humans who then feel existentially unnerved, feeling that they may not have their contribution to make to the world. AI is also creating privacy and security issues as more and more information and more data is stored in the cyber world. It opens up the prospects of cyber warfare and manipulation and control and all of these kind of security issues, creating for a very, very volatile environment. Humans are not exercising their cognitive abilities as much as they could be due to over-reliance on technology, and therefore that can create a diminishing of their own capacities. So here we are beginning to get a picture of how AI is affecting our world. And now I will come to really the main message that I would like to share with everyone today, which is that AI, and in fact technology in and of itself, is neutral. Of course, we know that technology is not entirely neutral because it can always tend us towards certain types of behaviors. But we can say that technology is neutral in the sense that according to what we frame that technology within, according to the understanding, the ethics, and the wider worldviews that we generate within ourselves, technology can be used in positive ways and negative ways. And therefore, what I would suggest today is that technology has to be surrounded by humanity, which then also has to be surrounded by spirituality. When these three layers are all incorporated within every individual, technology, humanity, and spirituality, then we can ensure that technology is used in its most powerful way in order to create well-being in society and in order to create well-being for the human individual on physical, emotional, and deeper spiritual levels, in order to create a well-being that allows us to experience a better quality of life and more happiness. I want to turn to the Bhagavad Gita, which talks about this. In the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the ancient Sanskrit classic, which is perhaps one of the most famous books of spiritual wisdom in the entirety of ancient India and South Asia as a total, Krishna in the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita reveals something to the listener Arjuna, which is very, very telling for our discussion today. In Sanskrit, Krishna says, Indriyani paranyahur indriyebhya param manaha manasastu para buddhir yo buddhye paratastu saha. The beginning of the Bhagavad Gita really helps us to frame identity and understand our own aspects to our being. And what Krishna there says to Arjuna in the third chapter, 42nd verse, is he says, the working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And the soul is even higher than the intelligence. So here in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna sets up a hierarchy. There is matter, and above matter there are the senses. Above the senses are the mind, and above the mind is intelligence. But above the intelligence, Krishna says, is the soul. And A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, on commentating on this verse, says, in the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution to the whole problem. So here we find A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is highlighting this point that the intelligence is ultimately a tool that is being used or should be used by consciousness or the soul. Consciousness or the soul is who we are, and the intelligence, the mind, the senses are tools that we're then using to interact with the material world. And thus, while artificial intelligence allows us to increase the capacity of our intelligence, we cannot forget that it requires an awakening of the soul to be able to utilize that intelligence in the most appropriate way. In this verse, Srila Prabhupada, he references the Katha Upanishad, and the Katha Upanishad gives a very, very powerful analogy to help us understand the interactions of these different aspects of our being. In the Katha Upanishad, the analogy or the metaphor of a chariot is given to help us understand our being. This analogy of a chariot was also employed by many philosophers. For example, Plato uses the analogy of the chariot where he talks about how there's a chariot, the body, a chariot driver, the soul, and he explains that the chariot is being driven by two horses, a white horse and a black horse, the lower nature and the higher nature. Sigmund Freud also uses the analogy of a chariot to also describe identity. He says the horses are like the human passions, and he says the driver is the ego that should control those human passions, and he says the passenger is the superego or the higher intelligence or the higher sentient self, which should then advise the driver on how to control the horses. The Katha Upanishad also utilizes this analogy of a chariot, and in Sanskrit explains Atmanam Rathinam Vidhi Shariram Ratham Evacha Buddhim tu Sarathim Vidhi Manapragraham Evacha Indriyani Hayan Ahur Vishayam Steshu Gocharan Atmendriya Mano Yuktam Bhoktetyahur Manishinaha. To describe this verse, I'll do it through a visual aid. What the Katha Upanishad basically explains is that the horses are like the senses. The reins which are controlling the horses are like the mind. The driver is the intelligence, but the passenger is actually the soul. And the passenger is the one who is meant to be directing the intelligence to then control the mind and senses. And this is a very, very powerful analogy, because as we understand, artificial intelligence is helping us to increase our capacity in the intellectual and analytical arena, yet that does not discount the fact or diminish the fact that the soul is the higher spiritual intelligence that has to control the artificial and the analytical intelligence. This is the final and the full equation, if you like, that I would like to share with all of you today. That AI, artificial intelligence, must be coupled together with EI or emotional intelligence, which must be then underpinned by SI or spiritual intelligence. In modern terminology, this has sometimes been called the tripartite of IQ, EQ, and SQ. IQ refers to analytical ability, but EQ refers to our ability to handle our emotions and relate to people in the human world in an appropriate way. SQ, however, refers to more fundamental questions of our existence, meaning, purpose, vision. While AI, EI, IQ, and EQ is about getting things done in this world, what's the best way to do things? SQ is asking the question, what are the best things to be doing? If IQ and EQ can help you to climb a wall, then SQ is that faculty within us which asks the question, should I be climbing the wall? Or what wall should I be climbing? Or what will I achieve by climbing this wall? If we don't exercise the capacity of SQ and EQ, then IQ in and of itself won't actually lead to well-being either on a societal level or on an individual level. While IQ and EQ deals with the whats and the hows of existence, SQ is dealing with the why, the fundamental reason why we do things. We can say science makes things better, but spirituality makes people better. And when the spiritual capacity to ask the question why is invoked and exercised in the world, then it allows us to use our capacity of the what and the how in a more powerful way. IQ recognizes that we are success-seeking beings, and therefore it helps us to get things done in the world. EQ recognizes that we're not just success-seeking, but we're social beings. So it's not just about getting things done and achieving in the world, but it's all about having meaningful relationships and community with others. It's not just about getting things done, but it's how we get things done. And that contributes to a deeper sense of happiness within us. But SQ realizes that we're not just success-seeking, we're not just social beings, but we are actually deeply spiritual beings. And therefore, to conclude today's talk, I would like to offer this equation, that technology and the ability of AI to give us more capacity to increase our analytical and processing abilities in this world, that technology be couched within humanity, within ethics, within morals, within values, which allow us to utilize those technologies to have better relationships, to have better community. And then I would offer to all of you that technology and humanity be couched within spirituality, a deep understanding of ourselves, a deep understanding of the world around us, a deep understanding of God, and a deep understanding of the essential desires within each one of us to find happiness, to find connection, to find love, and to be very clear about how to do that in this world. And when we have developed ourselves on all three of these levels, technology, humanity, and spirituality, can we use AI in a very, very powerful way to bring out about a happier world and a happier individual. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'll conclude my little presentation there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keshava Swami. That was most insightful, instructive. And I think the principles that you've shared with us around IQ, EQ, and SQ are really will become a lifelong challenge for all of us, I think, in reality. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Itumeleng Monale, who joins us as a guest speaker for our lecture today. Itumeleng is the Chief Operating Officer of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. She joined the JSE in January 2021 and has a wealth of knowledge and experience, having worked in management consulting, banking, and financial services for more than 20 years. I've personally been able to work with Itumeleng for at least the last 10 years, and she's distinguished herself not just in corporate field, but also in the areas of community, social upliftment, and of course, her family. As the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of the JSE, Itumeleng is responsible for the development and execution of the JSE strategy, which encompasses client experience, sustainability, retail, as well as the exchange's public policy and regulatory advisory portfolio. Further to that, she oversees the JSE's HR function, trading operations, and the client service center. Before joining the JSE, Itumeleng spent 17 years in banking, where she held various positions, including those of the head of self-service banking, developing new banking products for the mass market and underbanked segments. She was the head of digital banking and channel innovation. Most recently, she led business architecture and data management. Itumeleng holds a BSc in biochemistry and genetics from Wits University, a global management certificate from Thunderbird School of Management in Arizona, and an executive MBA from the London School of Economics.
Thank you very much, Nanda, and thank you to the BBT Trust for the opportunity to engage in this most important conversation. Thank you also to Swami. I really resonate with much of what you have said this afternoon, and perhaps what I have to say would be much more complementary in the sense of how AI actually has been constructed. I certainly subscribe to the concept of the humanity that is required for AI to be a useful tool. Technology, in a sense, and AI indeed, really has so many opportunities that humanity can leverage that can advance many very important social causes. But as well, on the other side, we have the risks of that artificial intelligence. And the risks come about, from my perspective, because AI is a human generated construct, right? And humanity by nature is fallible. You know, it is said that we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. And while we are here, we really do not necessarily always ascribe to the highest set of values or ethics in what we do. Greater society has deployed technology historically mostly for really capitalistic objectives. And if you take it from that perspective and how machine learning and AI works, the data set with which gets fed into any machine learning capability is what informs the outcome or the output of that intelligence, as artificial as it is. And my argument is the core risk lies in that, the fact that a human being with intrinsic bias would have directed the code that really gets deployed from a technological perspective. And all of us come from different perspectives, and bias is almost intrinsically natural until you work very consciously and deliberately to open your perspectives and include more information such that your perspective then is enriched. Now, we know as professionals that have been leveraging and utilizing these capabilities that the nature of this technology has been developed in a construct or in a context that does not contain a fair representation of all of humanity's intelligence. So if you look at where AI has been developed and the type of data sets that it is trained upon, it by nature excludes such a significant component of this world's population's wisdom. It only takes into account that which is available to it as a machine. And that tends to be in written form, in the form that has been aggregated and collated and made available on the World Wide Web or in terms of the internet. There are so many millions of human beings on this earth that come from cultures whose language has never been captured in any written form. Their wisdom from an ancestral perspective over millennia and decades has been passed on in story form and in a verbal context that has never been captured in a context that this machine can go and access so that it can enrich its perspective. And so those are the risks that I think, if we're saying that at the core of it, you must humanize AI and bring spirituality to its outcomes, we need to work harder to expose as an enrichment of the context in which these artificial intelligence and machines actually learn from. The biggest risk is the world is currently, I think, in a form of crisis. Humanity, in my personal opinion, is more polarized than it has been in quite a long time. And the nature of that polarization and the nature of the entities who own the most popular applied tools of technology is such that we have a risk of further polarization in how those sets of intelligence from an artificial perspective and machines are utilized. So how do we counter that? The more open the code that anyone can contribute to, the more likely it is to be more inclusive. The more likely it is to bring different perspectives and a contrarian view rather than ratify an echo chamber of the entity which has a very specific outcome and possibly a commercial reason for the deployment of such intelligence. And so confirmation bias and echo chambers then come into the fore. If a piece of intelligence has been developed by a commercial entity for its own commercial reasons, it's ironic to me that much of what we see today in social media and the likes really does not have a human or an EQ level of application to it in terms of its objective, but it still leverages and bases all its learning and intelligence on behaviors of humans. And so it takes our humanity and almost uses it against us. And in a sense, that can be used for good, and that can be used for very destructive purposes if we are not careful. To Swami's point, the consciousness that gets applied to the objective that you utilize AI for is really what drives that. And my sense is, the entire purpose of spirituality is for growth, right? We're put on this earth, and hopefully over time we're very deliberate about learning and challenging our own perspective and therefore growing. And I'm yet to personally experience any growth based on being told the same things that I believe in already. And oftentimes, the most common applications of AI is in the field of behavioral science. If I liked something as a subject matter, it gives me more of that which I showed a bias towards, rather than giving me a contrarian view that challenges my sense of thinking. So perhaps we need more of those applications that enrich one's perspectives, that make sure that if I have a certain belief system and it appears that I engage in certain circles of the same thought patterns, it presents to me alternative views. I think we all travel for the very reason. All of us come from very specific cultures, some of them so homogenous that until you break out of the area that you grew up in, you actually think the entire world thinks and lives and believes and behaves exactly like you do. And because you break out of that sphere, travel becomes one of your greatest educators in life. You get different cultural experiences, you get exposure to different minds, patterns and thought patterns. And as a result, you challenge your own perspectives. And over time, I believe humanity gets better. So we need to somehow make sure that the balance in how AI and technology is developed over time has a growing body of knowledge that is fed by really interested people who have humanity's best intentions at heart. Most of the time, the type of people that are in industry feeding the knowledge base only have commercial outcomes as an objective. And it almost takes volunteerism on the other end of the spectrum, which really hankers for better wisdom and elevated levels of thinking. So I think that really what we need to do is have a groundswell of people who want a return to a much more balanced lifestyle, much more balanced way of thinking, and wellness of being. And wellness of being comes in all facets of and dimensions of our existence. I would argue that the challenges that we've been through in the past 5 years alone have disrupted many traditional ways of thinking that humanity might have had as a collective, but at the same time have reminded us the deep need for connection, the rootedness, that which makes us human and that which makes us well is community and connection, and almost as basic as human touch. That an intelligent being can never give if it is not artificial, right? There's something about the heartbeat of another human being in proximity that, as an element of well-being, that no machine and no text or no, even a robot cannot give. And I would argue that there will always be a place in the world, as long as human beings still occupy this earth, that needs that. And that is the argument of where do we take things going forward as maybe more interested parties that want to ensure a balance in how human outcomes evolve. So I will wrap up, I guess, my argument by saying, the perceived needs of humanity are what has driven where we are with technology right now. And I emphasize the word perceived because I guess once one elevates their level of consciousness and seeks wellness and balance and better wisdom, you find that the things that you thought you needed are not necessarily what you actually need. And so the consciousness part of how we bring a balance to the tools that humanity leverages right now is most important. There's always a risk that anything can be applied for malicious purposes. And I guess it's again the balance of the chariot. How do we pull the chariot and how do we influence that chariot to make sure that the tools that future generations of our own children have access to are much better off than what we might be experiencing today?
Thank you for that wonderful insight, Itumeleng. With your permission, I'm going to just broaden the conversation a little bit and enter into a more conversational style, because I think we have wonderful insights to be able to draw on. And in what we have discussed thus far with Keshava Swami and yourself, I think we've got a very deep appreciation of AI, of the extension into humanity. I'm keen to pursue the God angle a little bit and divinity. So I think we'll start with your permission. And there's this idea that God in one sense is perceived. Some of the attributes generally associated with God are omniscient, omnipresent, and people are starting to, in some quarters, associate those same qualities and attributes with artificial intelligence, this super intelligence that is all-knowing, that is accessible to me at any time. I'd be very keen to hear from your perspectives around that particular topic, around AI as a form of divinity, as a form of God, as something that people should connect to for that spiritual perspective. Perhaps we can start with you, Keshava Swami, and then we'll come to Itumeleng.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to thank Itumeleng for her wonderful insights, which triggered many things within me, which perhaps we can discuss as we go along. But thank you, Nanda, for your question. And I think in your question, something very telling. described divinity, you talked about God, and you mentioned two qualities, omniscient and omnipresent. But the third one that we generally hear about is omnibenevolent. That God or divinity is all three of those qualities, is all knowing, is all aware, is all present, but very, very importantly is all loving, all kind, all compassionate, all magnanimous. And it's interesting that out in your definition you missed that quality. And I think that in itself holds the key to answering your question, that while AI may well become, whether it will be all-knowing, it can definitely encompass huge amounts of information. And while it may never be all-pervading, it can definitely spread itself into pervading many corners of the reality that, previously were inaccessible. But can it really be all loving, omnibenevolent? Can you really have a relationship? Can you really feel that emotional exchange? Can you have that feeling of volition and, in a relationship? And I think that kind of draws on one of the initial points that I made in my presentation about how no matter how much AI develops, it will never really be conscious. It will never really be able to display personality, free will. And without personality, without free will, without sentience, in that sense, there's no question of love. And without love, what is a connection with divinity? And so I would say AI in this way has its purpose and role to play, but can never really be that deity that with whom we can really have that loving, heartfelt exchange.
Thank you. Itumeleng, is there something you'd like to share on this particular point?
Yes, Nanda, thank you. I'm going to try and veer away from the spiritual kind of declarations, but what I can say is AI is a tool like any other. And tools evolve, right? Over time, they get better, they get more efficient, but they remain tools. And so if we were to think about a parallel analogy in the analog world, the Bhagavad Gita, the Holy Bible, the Holy Quran, the Torah, all of those are scripts that are interpretations of divine message. Let's put it that way, right? No one carries a Bible around and says, this is God. They use it as another way of accessing wisdom and perhaps then helping their own interpretation of a direct relationship that every human being has with their higher being, right? So all of us have a direct relationship. Some of us ascribe to a method of, I guess, translation or interpretation through another human being who has walked a much more kind of closer spiritual journey and probably has a higher level of wisdom than ourselves, and then also utilize other mechanisms to enrich that perspective. That's what I see AI to be. And just because it sounds cleverer and it thinks at a much faster speed and analyzes much more data, to me does not negate the need for one to have a direct relationship and a sense of free will of your own and internal interpretation of your relationship with God, right? So it's I'm sure somebody who maybe grew up pre-industrial age might look at a computer and think that is the voice of God. They might talk to Alexa and think it is the voice of God. It's just on another level. I suppose it's amplified, but I certainly wouldn't think it's a substitution.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to continue with that theme. And one point you mentioned, I think it came up in both conversations, was around being rooted in connection. And often we see the role of technology as it becomes more pervasive and expansive, that we start to become more isolated. And in many ways, spirituality, at the essence of spirituality, is that shared connection. I'd be eager to hear from you both on that point around how can technology, how can it be adapted to deepen connection, and as you mentioned, Itumeleng, as a tool to strengthen and deepen one's relationship, as opposed to a distraction and something that's diverting our attention. Maybe I could start with you, and then we'll go to Keshava Swami.
Thank you, Nanda. So I suppose the biologist in me, because I have a science background, ascribes to the notion that when a human is still in the first 5 to 7 years of existence, most of the learning they do is not verbal in nature. It doesn't come from a book, and it does not come from any form of listening to a artificially generated set of knowledge. In a sense, it comes from interaction with other human beings, picking up on nonverbal cues, understanding what safety, love, security means is nonverbal in nature. And that is the basis of what helps to wire your neurons and make them able to then learn other things and consume other types of information and data. And so for me, that's the departure point, right? The departure point is, first, let there be humanity, community, and connection. And then you layer on a sense of extra information and extra tools that can then accelerate or amplify or enhance your ability to understand, learn, and have access to information.
Fantastic. Thank you. Keshava Swami, is there anything you'd like to share on this point?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a really important question. And we're always grappling with this kind of sense of, am I using technology or am I being used by technology? And that is such an important conversation. And I think it's an individual reflection for each one of us to kind of look in our lives and say, like, am I using this technology to improve my quality of life and achieve what I want to achieve in the world? Or has it come to a point where I've become subordinated, as Itumeleng was saying, that, AI is a tool. When you talked about, relationships, it reminded me of a very famous poem, The Paradoxes of Our Modern World. And it's a very beautiful poem in which the writer says, we have wider highways but narrower minds. We have taller buildings but shorter tempers. We have more conveniences but less time. We've increased our possessions but we've reduced our values. We've conquered outer space, but we haven't conquered inner space. And in one of the lines, the writer says, we're more and more connected, but further and further apart. And this sense of crowded loneliness, that people are able to interact with each other, but what's the quality of that interaction? What's the meaningfulness of that interaction? In fact, the World Health Organization talks about how mental health is going to be one of the biggest issues in the world, already is and will continue to become. And one of the primary reasons is because of lack of meaningful relationship. And therefore, again, as we become more and more connected through AI in terms of communicating with each other, to remember that that word artificial intelligence is a very telling word, because artificial, you could say the opposite to artificial is natural. The opposite to artificial is substantial. So let us remember that in artificial intelligence, its name itself outlines its weakness. That if we use artificial intelligence to compound our artificiality in how we interact, and we don't factor in substantiality and naturality and human connection, as was mentioned, then we'll find that our relationships slide even more.
Thank you. That's very insightful. And I could relate to that modern paradox. I'm looking at my watch, which only once upon a time used to tell me when I was late, and now it tells me how bad my health is because I haven't taken enough steps and that I haven't breathed enough. And so I've seen that I think we've all experienced that practically. I wanted to come back to a point that Tumaleng was raising around the responsibility of the creators of this technology, as well as the responsibility of the consumers of this technology. So in many ways, it can sometimes feel that we are surrendering our free will because I've got the algorithm as my boss, the algorithm as my assistant, the algorithm as my partner. And so I'm just I'm being guided by by these choices that I think I'm making, but perhaps I'm being substantially influenced around. And so you get to just explore this point around the responsibilities of creators of this type of technology, as well as consumers of this technology, how we should be engaging with this in a more eyes wide open context.
It's really
I
sorry, Nanda. I assumed you were directing it to me first. I think it's really interesting to see how regulation around the world is starting to evolve in response to the rapid pace of development of these tools. Um, and I would argue that I guess the departure point of a lot of these regulatory bodies is trying to first protect the individual. And initially, it was just to protect the privacy and the information related to one as an individual. I think the British and the EU are trying to take it a step further by starting to investigate the impacts beyond just privacy of AI and what it can have access to and not. So it's a very important thing around responsibility, but oftentimes you find that the responsible outcomes come later after destruction because something has been allowed to permeate and be so pervasive with not an amount of guardrails around it. Let's put it that way. Um, we all have limitations as humans, and so we can try our best to, I guess, put parameters around the outcomes we think are fair and we think are ethical. It could cut both ways. It may indeed hamper progress and evolution towards levels of tools that would really be helpful. But at the same time, I suppose the objective is always to protect. It's so far hasn't been quite to protect our humanity, but rather to protect our privacy up until this point. And I would argue if there was a body that could try and articulate that which makes us human, that which continues and will perpetuate the human race as a connected and well collective of beings, we then might be able to, I don't know, reduce to parameters or standards some things that should be taken into account by the developers of this technology.
Thank you. Keshava Swami?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think regulation is a very, very interesting thing. When you put a wall around a child to protect them, often the child feels like it's a restriction, it's a limitation, it's almost sometimes in the world today, regulation can be seen as censorship and an infringement upon freedom. And therefore, I think to give a very high level answer to this, I think a lot of what we require in the world is more inspiration along with the regulation. For example, I'll give you a very kind of practical example. What we've been hearing more about in recent years, more and more, is the kind of glories of digital detox, and kind of this idea whereby, you put your devices away for some period of the day, or there's a period in the year when you kind of go off the grid, and just the amazing effect that can have on your life when you just kind of step away and kind of be more conscious about how you're engaging with these devices. And I find that does a lot more for helping people to interact appropriately with technologies than a kind of simply a prescriptive, like, don't do this, don't do that, this is as much as you can use this is as much as you can use that. And therefore, I think inspirational teachings in spirituality and ethics to really help people understand the why. In my presentation, I think we talked about the why, the how, and the what. And I think regulation is a lot about the how and the what. But I think when we try to share in the world the why, the impact of not following these regulations and not embracing these boundaries, and what effect that then has, I think when we give people that deep understanding and inspiration, then they're ready to regulate themselves. So I think we need to try to veer towards a space where people are inspired to regulate themselves. And then I think we'll be going in a very healthy direction.
Wonderful, thank you. You had mentioned earlier that there were some points in Itumeleng's comments that you wanted to build on and elaborate. So maybe there's an opportunity to just open the discussion and just in free format share some additional thoughts, and then the same for Itumeleng before we come to a close.
Yes, there were many points, and I think some of them I factored into my responses. But one thing that I really did appreciate, Itumeleng's kind of highlight of how the technology is actually not neutral. Because I had made that statement, and I kind of, I also felt that, AI is not completely neutral. And your illumination on that in terms of how AI technologies are created, the data that's inputted, and the innate bias that there is within those technologies, which is then proliferated in the world and then accentuates that bias and gives that bias a lot of power in the world. I think that's something that I've never really thought about, and I would like to think more about after you've mentioned that. So yeah, that was one of the points which I really appreciate and took away as something to think about.
Thank you, Keshava Swami. Itumeleng, if we can come to you for any further thoughts and deliberations you've had, or anything else you'd want to share with our audience.
Nanda, I think we've covered most of it, actually, but I do appreciate the opportunity to have had such a wonderful engagement about two topics that mean so much to me. And I think, the innate bias of the world is felt by those of us who maybe do not occupy parts of the world that have almost informed how modern society has set their standards. And so we're more alive to the things that maybe, Google doesn't understand. and if you look at things such as an example, Big Pharma, they will utilize, what's known in terms of traditional allopathic medicine to try and cure illness. However, there's so much more ancient wisdom that first does no harm and, of course, keeps you well so that you don't even have the illness in the first place. And so there's so many examples outside of just this context that starts to re-emphasize to us as the stewards of whatever future that we're trying to curate for future generations, and that being us that are here now. We're learning lessons that perhaps mean unlearning some things that we took for granted in the past, and collectively starting to shift our perspectives by increasing the inclusivity of the knowledge base that we apply to solve the world's problems right now.
That's such a wonderful point. Thank you. I'll go to Keshava Swami for his concluding remarks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation in which we've kind of reflected on couching technology within humanity and ethics, and then having spiritual values and spiritual worldviews surrounding that. And I always remember Martin Luther King, who said, "We have guided missiles but misguided humanity." And so, we really need to look at orientation. We really need more spiritual information, more ethical and more wisdom surrounding morals and values. And I think the challenge today for spiritualists is to be able to present ethics, humanity, spirituality in an inspirational and empowering way, rather than something which feels limiting or something which feels to be very suffocating. And I think if we're able to present that through humanity and spirituality and using technology within boundaries, it will actually help us to create a beautiful playing field on which there can be so much creativity without these negative impacts. I think if we're able to do that, that will surely allow for a brighter future as technology becomes more and more advanced.
So this has been such a fascinating discussion on such an important topic, and I hope you've enjoyed the perspectives and insights that have been shared by our speakers as much as I have. Of course, we'd like to extend our deep gratitude to Keshava Swami, as well as Itumeleng Manale for their participation and sharing their wisdom with us today. We'd also like to express our gratitude to the team at BBT Africa for hosting this important conversation, and the production team and all the volunteers that are involved in the great work of BBT Africa. We'd like to thank you for your attention and participation, and look forward to you joining us in our next conversation.